Hello, welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
Oh, shoot. Hey, we're starting a new series today in sort of preparing ourselves for the next season of what God has for us as a church. We're going to be doing a series called The Art of Neighboring. Has anyone read the book, The Art of Neighboring, before? I'm curious. We had a couple of folks in the first service that had read it, but one of the things that we really believe is true is that we there's very little value in just building buildings for the sake of having new buildings. The whole purpose behind us going through all of these growing pains is because we believe that after the birth pains, there's a baby, right? There's something new. And what we believe is that God is preparing us for a whole season of people coming into community, having a place and a community to become sons and daughters of God. And that God has not reached nearly the amount of people that he intends to reach through the life of this church. And that this story, the chapter that's ahead of us, isn't a story about walls going up or new worship spaces. It's a story of God reaching people, bringing them into his family. To call them sons and daughters of God. And as we sort of begin, before we get into some of the art of neighboring content that we'll talk through, we felt like it would be good to just take a moment and pause and reflect on what God has done in the life of the vineyard in this city. And many of you know, was a pastor at a vineyard church out towards Smithville for around 20 years. And when I started going to the vineyard church when I was in my senior year of high school, God had already spoken to some people that he wanted a new church in Kansas City, and those people followed him. They took a big risk and faith step, and they began putting down roots in Kansas City. They began inviting people into small groups to come and to hear about a life with God. People began giving their lives to Jesus, and those small groups then reached a point where there was enough people that it made sense to start gathering on Sundays. And the gathering place that they chose was in Lakeview Elementary School, about 15 minutes from here. And in the school cafeteria, there was a vineyard church that set up and tore down every week. Anyone ever done set up and tear down church? Yes. Christian has done set up and tear down church with me multiple times. Yeah. And we would live in that rhythm, and then God put it on the hearts of the people that were in that church to become wildly generous, to pool their resources, and to build a place where they would gather for more than just the 4 hours you could rent a school building on a Sunday morning, but to have a place for all week long where children could be discipled and where classes could be held and where people could meet Jesus. And so the building project of that church didn't go according to plan. Things took way longer than they should have. It was messy. But in God's sort of providence in the whole thing, the timing of finally opening that building of that vineyard church lined up with 9/11 happened. And as 9/11 was happening and people started to ask deep spiritual questions, it just so happened that tens of thousands of mailers hit mailboxes all around Kansas City saying, come and see that God is good. Investigate a life with God. Come and bring your questions. Come and bring your lives and enter into a life with God. And so this church that had taken years and years to grow to a couple hundred people in a very short period of time grew and like doubled and maybe even tripled in just like a short few month window of time, which none of us could have designed on our own. But God, as he does, knew that if there were people who would make room for others to come and to meet with him, that he would bless that, and sort of Field of Dreams like, right? If you build it, I'll fill it, is essentially how God interacts with people, communities of faith. And we found ourselves growing so quickly that we felt like we had built this building that would we can grow for years in this building, is what we were telling ourselves. And then in a short couple of months, we didn't fit in the building anymore, right? And I'm kind of praying that that's what happens here with us, is that God's dreams and his designs for reaching people and bringing them into his family are bigger than we could ever have dreamed. And we found ourselves during that period of time adding a third service on a weekend. You guys, how many of you guys were here when there was just one Sunday morning service, right? And then we realized, we don't all fit. We need a second service so that more people, we need to make more room for more people to come and to know that God is good. And in the life of that North Vineyard, we added a third service, and then God filled it, and then we added another service, and then God filled that one, and we added another, and eventually we were doing 7 services a weekend just to fit everyone in, which felt like, as a worship leader, felt like running a marathon every Saturday and Sunday. But we couldn't bear the idea that we would put a cap on what God could do in the life of the church. We would do whatever it took so that people would have room to come and to know Jesus. And we reached the point where we were like, we would do almost anything. We're not doing an 8th service. And God had put it on our heart many years before that we would be the kind of church that planted new churches. And so one of my very good friends, who had been the youth pastor, of the North Vineyard, and I believe Robbie as well, who led us in worship this morning, and a team of people left the North Vineyard and planted this Vineyard Church. And through their faithfulness and their making room, and through the goodness of God with the folks that had been meeting in this building who welcomed a Vineyard Church to come and plant here in this space, God has continued to move and to reach people. Generation after generation, we believe that what God wants to do in this area is continue to reach people, bring them into his family, and that this church even would give birth to other churches. Cody has said in the past, you've heard him say things like, we believe that this church was born pregnant, right? That it was a church that was planted that had church plants in it. And so what we believe is that as we look forward to what God will do through a new building, the real treasure of our heart is not the building itself. It's the movement of God that can be facilitated in that space. And in this unique church, there are some things that we've seen God do. That have you noticed that young people are reached in this church? That there are hundreds of kids from the Piper School District that end up gathering here after football games, that this church makes a disproportionate amount of impact in the lives of young people around. What we believe is that God will continue to do that as long as this church stands. That is one of the things uniquely that he's called this community to do. God's also called us as a community to serve unconditionally, to serve regardless of whether we ever get anything back for having served in the community, to be a place where people are invited and known and loved as they are, to be a place. We believe that God has called us to be a place where worship is central to who we are, that the experience of God's presence as we join together, as we sing, as we invite God's presence in prayer and in worship, that our hearts would be changed and transformed, that people would give their life to Jesus in this place, and people's lives would be generationally transformed in this place. That's what we believe God will continue to do in an even greater way as we keep saying yes and taking risks in our life of following him, and sacrifice to see God's work done in this world. And what we really believe, here's where we sort of take a turn into some of the art of neighboring idea, is this, that you many times probably heard Cody say, this is like the locker room where we gather, we get direction, we sort of know where we're going to aim, we know who's going to go and do what kingdom work and who they're going to do it with, and we resource people. But the actual game is not the gathering for service. That's where we're filled up. The actual game is all week long outside of the walls of the building, wherever God has placed each person that's a part of this community. The truth is that everyone gets to play is a really central Vineyard value. That God has plans and designs for every single person who's here. And that when you go to work, that's a spiritual thing. And when you're in your home and in your neighborhood, that is a spiritual thing. And the people of God making room, I would just say this as a framing thought for us for the weeks to come. I believe this, that the room that we're making right now is for people that God has already placed in your life. Does this make sense? God has already put people around every single one of us in our workplace, in our neighborhoods, in our day-to-day life that do not yet know his love. And that those people that God has put around us are the people that he's entrusted us to share the goodness and the love of God with. Now, as we look at neighboring, I would suggest this. We in the United States have an interesting relationship to the idea of being a neighbor. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You wake up in the morning, get ready for work, you go to your car, which is parked inside of a garage. You get in that car inside of the garage. You push a button. You back out of a driveway. You might wave to a neighbor, but you're not really out chit-chatting in the mornings. You drive to work. You work all day. You drive back, pull into your driveway, hit the button, the garage opens, and your car goes straight in. Does this sound familiar? Most of us do not wake up and just dawdle around the neighborhood checking in with folks, right? If you look at architecture, like home architecture, in the last 50 years or so, do you remember how old houses were built with wraparound front porches? Do you remember that? How are homes built now? With back decks. We don't gather in front of our houses in a way that puts us around our neighbors and our community in the way. We have back decks, and if you really are doing well in life, your back deck is surrounded by trees, so you don't even have to look at a neighbor. Do you know what I'm saying? The grill, where does the grill go? On the back deck. Not in the front driveway. So many of the ways that we are organized culturally are not built around neighbor connection. They're built on individual privacy. And our homes are many times seen as fortresses of solitude. Does that make sense? This is my calm place. This is where I escape all the other humans, kind of a thing. I would say this. We're going to talk about God's plan for neighbors in this series over the weeks to come. I, in my earlier life, would have had no right to speak on this topic, on the idea of being relationally connected to neighbors. That's the truth of the matter. And God has worked on this idea in my life over these last couple of decades in a way that's totally transformed the way I think about what it means to love my neighbor as myself. When I was young, about 18, 19 years old, just out of high school, I was working a bunch of jobs, like manual labor type jobs. One of them was painting houses. I had a fear of heights, so that one was hilarious, but I had good instruction. And then I did some trim carpentry and some of those types of things. I saved up some money, and I moved out on my own from my parents' house with some money in the bank to make sure I never had to move back again. And I moved into a single bedroom apartment that cost less than $400. Imagine that, right? And I lived there for 2 years. And I never during those 2 years met a single neighbor. I did not know the name of anyone that lived in the apartment complex. I did not go to a single social gathering or function. It was my place that I went to sleep, to cook, and then I would leave this apartment, go work these jobs all day long, and in whatever time I had free, I was a part of this church that I described had been rapidly growing. I lived at the church building, leading worship all weekend long, most evenings of the week. I was like integrated into like the schedule and the rhythm of church life. But in 2 years, I never once met a person that lived even next to me in this apartment complex. Couldn't tell you the names of any of them. I moved out of there after a couple of years into my first house. And this house was in Old Town Parkville. And I only had one neighbor to the side of me. And I met this gal. She was pretty quirky, truth be told. She had a parrot in her house that used to yell, "Help!" And it took me a long time to figure out, like, I wasn't living next to someone dangerous. And so she was pretty quirky. I was friendly to her. She was friendly to me. I'd wave. But, like, you know, she's like a grown-up, probably retirement kind of age. And I'm like a young 20-something musician. What do we really have to talk about, you know? So I knew her by name. I would wave to her. But, like, our lives weren't really connected, even though we lived right next to each other. And I realized how not connected we were one day. I had this, like, wake-up call in my mind for the kind of neighbor I really was. An FBI agent came to my front door, knocks on my door, and says, "Hey, are you Mr. Jones?" And what immediately goes through my mind is, "I've been good," you know. And I go, "Yes, I am." And she says, I wanted to ask you some questions about one of the people that you're acquainted with. And I go, "Okay." And come to find out, she's doing a background check on someone. She names the person. I guess it was a part of the process of his hiring was security screening kind of a thing, for he was going to do something sensitive. And so they were checking in with people who we knew for the type of security clearance that he would need. And she goes, "Do you know Matthew so-and-so?" And I go, "Never heard of him." And she tilts her head funny and goes, "You don't know Matthew so-and-so?" And I go, No. And I go, "Do you have any other questions for me?" And she's like, "Yes." Starts to ask me questions about whether I would think there'd be any issues with him having security clearances and things like that. And I'm sitting here going, well, I don't necessarily have any more. If I don't know him, I don't know if we should give him access to anything. And so she realizes I'm like useless, you know, for what she's trying to accomplish. And she is on her way out the door. And I go, "Hey, just out of curiosity, like, how would I even know this person?" And she goes, "He lives next door to you." I didn't know that this gal had a son who had recently come back out of serving in the military. Like, I knew so little about the life of my neighbor or how her world was put together that I couldn't even answer a simple question about that there was someone else over there, kind of a deal. I was in my own world, in my own bubble. And yes, I was serving the Lord and leading worship day in and day out in the life of a local growing church. But as far as loving my neighbor, I was like not crushing it, let's say. Does that make sense? So I start hanging out with a friend of mine who's a church planter in Arvada, Colorado, a guy named Jay Pathak, who's now the national director of all the Vineyard churches. And at the time, he was a church planter, and I would go to Arvada, Colorado, and lead worship at his church for his church plant every so often. And his church was growing really quickly for a church plant. And I would ask him, "How are you doing this?" And he'd go, "Mostly through throwing parties." And in my mind, the way that you grow a church is that you have classes and you have services, and you know, there's like this activity that happens in a church building, and then that grows and grows and grows. And he's like, no, man, we just throw parties and we invite everyone we meet, everyone we see. People are so lonely in their day-to-day life. No one ever invites them to parties. No one ever cooks for them. No one ever gets to know them. And so we just, and I'm with people from this Vineyard Church in Arvada, and we're in the grocery getting stuff for like a cookout to throw a party, and they start inviting the people that work at the grocery store to just swing by after their shift and giving them their address, like kind of a thing. And it starts shifting in my mind. I go, Jay, this is not very normal. and he goes, it's neighboring. And the whole world would look differently if people actually believe that it wasn't like hyperbolic, but that Jesus actually meant love God and love your neighbor. Like your actual neighbor, the people that live in your community. If you really loved them, included them, invited them into your world, Jesus would transform everything. And then he writes a book called The Art of Neighboring, which is kind of what we'll work through as we get ready to have some more room to invite some more people. But what we found is I then moved with I got married with these sort of new art of neighboring ideas in my mind. We moved into a loft apartment in Zona Rosa. You guys know how there's apartments above all those shops and stuff. That's where my wife and I lived when we were newlyweds. My wife is better at being a neighbor than I am, just naturally. She doesn't have any introvert tendencies. She doesn't need alone time. I've told her I needed alone time before, and she said, sounds great. When are we going to do that? Right? Like she's lovely. She's so good at people. And so we're living together, and we start going to like all these social gatherings and meeting neighbors. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what Jay was trying to teach me about, of like being present with the people that God put around you, kind of a thing. And so we make friends with some neighbors, and then we move to a townhome. And instead of just knowing a few couples from the apartments we lived near, we start meeting a lot of people in the neighborhood that we bought the townhome in. We start meeting people at the pool. We start eating with people. We start getting to know folks. We start watching people's dogs when they're out of town. Like it's just, our lives start having less and less walls up between us and people. And then we buy a house in this neighborhood, and then we start meeting a lot more people, like everyone on our block and everyone on the block behind us and everyone in the cul-de-sacs across from us and everybody. And my wife starts serving to help lead the neighborhood swim team, which has 160 kids, and we meet all of the parents of all the kids in the neighborhood. And now I would say all these years later, a couple of decades later, what it means to me to actually be a neighbor is totally different than the young man that got a single bedroom apartment and never met a soul. I believe this deeply, that when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, yes, that is whoever he puts in your path, but you know the people he puts in your path day in and day out are the ones that literally share a back fence with you or a property line with you. Or if you live in a dorm room, they shared the wall next door with you, the common room space. Like the people that God has put around you that are your neighbors day in and day out. He has plans for them. And so I'll just ask you this and reflect on this with me. I'm going to ask you a series of questions for you to do a little self-evaluation about your orientation to neighboring. Here's the first question. You can choose to raise your hand or not. That's up to you. How many of you can name every one of your neighbors? We got a couple of hands. That's not bad. That's not bad. How many of you can name everyone in your neighbor's family? All their children? Maybe they have grown children that don't even live in your neighborhood, but you still know their names and what's going on with them? Somewhat? Yeah. We got a couple people who are good at this. Naturally, they're intuiting. How many of you know what all of your neighbors do for work? Like where they go all day, every day? What they set their hands to? How many of you know what their hobbies are? Like what makes them feel alive? What makes them feel like they're having fun and enjoying the world, yeah? Sometimes you can see hobbies easier than you can see work because you know a bass boat means bass fishing, right? Like some of it's self-evident. The golf clubs are in the driveway, oh, they play golf. Some of those things are a little easier, but let me ask this. How many of you have invited your neighbors to come and share a meal in your home and cook together? A few? How many of you know the struggles and the painful things and the needs? Like the real deep life stuff. The how it's going parenting their kids. What are their disappointments? How many of you know exactly what they believe about God and a life with Him? Every one of your neighbors. See, the interesting thing is, in American culture, we have to be real honest with ourselves. We're individualistic in a way that is not necessarily giving God any room to use us so that we would go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them everything that Jesus commanded, and realizing that God's presence is with us always, even to the end of the age. That fulfilling the Great Commission is really challenging when we realize our first barrier to entry is knowing the name of the person next door. You see how individualistic lives could potentially keep us from doing this really important thing that God has entrusted us with. The Barna Group does sociological research. When they polled people in a study, this would have been, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I believe this study was conducted. Maybe more. I get old quick. But when they asked people who had no church affiliation at all or no religious affiliation at all, why don't you go to church? The number one result, 80% of people said, no one has ever invited me. That's the reason they don't go. They have no faith community because people in the faith community don't invite them. I was talking to a friend of mine at work who he would not consider himself a follower of Jesus yet. And I pray for him a lot. Deeply care about this person. And we've traveled together for work from time to time. And he was asking me, he goes, it's interesting. I don't think Christians believe what they say they believe. And I go, interesting. Tell me what you mean when you say that. And he goes, if you actually believed that there was a heaven and a life with God who would forgive people and change their lives, why are none of them bothering me to come and be a part of that? And I go, well, I can't speak for all of Christendom, but I do know this. God put a person that follows him right next to you at work and in a vehicle with you in this moment. And I know he really loves you. And so I can't answer it for every single Christian or for every single person that doesn't have a life with God, but I can tell you this. He put somebody with you right now that believes that a life with him would be better than any other kind of life. He goes, okay. Well, so he's just sending Steves everywhere? I go, no, man, I'm the B team. He's got better people than me. Sorry, you got me, And the answer, though, to that question is, yeah. That's what this is. For people who have found a life with God and know that their worth is not defined by the most broken thing that they've ever done, but that they've been forgiven and brought out of an old life and into a new life with God, yes, the game plan for God in his kingdom is that we would actually share. That we would taste and see the goodness of God and invite others to know the goodness we've known. That's the thing. When we go see a movie we love, we tell everyone. When we go to a World Cup event, we tell everyone. When we eat at a fantastic restaurant, we tell everyone. And yet, as it relates to the goodness of God, so many of us have been fooled into thinking, this is me, it's my private faith life. I need not bother people with things like that. The most precious treasure we have it for the sharing. So I want us to read this passage from Paul, where he talks, there's a couple of ideas in here where he frames some things that we need to not miss. Paul is in the church in Athens, and he sees people worshiping all kinds of stuff. And then he realizes there's a moment of grace for him to explain who the one true God is. And this is Acts 17:22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the, Areopagus, and said, if you go to seminary, you should learn how to pronounce some of these things. But people of Athens, I see that in every way you're very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing that you're worshiping. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. So these people are worshiping. They have a bunch of different gods. They sacrifice to a bunch of different things. But just in case there's a God that they don't know about, that they're forgetting about, people would worship to the unknown God just so they're not ticking someone off that they hadn't found yet. Right? And so this is Paul's moment to actually share, hey, there is a God that is unknown to you, and it's the one true God. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples built by human hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. It's his breath in our lungs. There's a reason we sing that. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and boundaries of their lands. And God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. See, when Paul is explaining who God is and what God's like, we need to not miss this because it has to do with us. Today, there are these three things that he says. The first is this: God chose the inhabitants of the earth. God has chosen who will be in every generation of human history. He knows them by name. Isn't that an awesome thought? You are not unknown to God. And your neighbor, he has chosen the generation your neighbor would be born into. And you are here so that some might know him. Here's the second thing. God appoints their time in history. He knows when they will draw their first breath, and he knows when they will draw their last. He knows the days, as David says, your days have been numbered before you were born. God knows the length of the dash between dates on your headstone. Some of us feel, how many of you guys feel like, I wish I would have been born during a different era of history? Like maybe pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-something that you think is bothersome. Like, no, God actually knew this is the period in time for this many days that Steve will be stomping around the planet. He knew that about you. And he knows the plans he has. See, God not only knows who goes in each generation and for how long they will draw breath on this earth, but God also appoints the place. Many of us think that we have chosen where our house will be. Have you ever put offers on houses that you inexplicably didn't get? Have you ever got an offer accepted on a house that you were like, this is a long shot, and then it happened? Has your work ever moved you from the town that you were pretty sure you would live in your whole life to go to some other town? And there's a whole new group of people and you're meeting them now? I believe this, that God appoints the place too for our lives, and that we do not steer ourselves as much as we tell ourselves we steer ourselves. I just said ourselves a lot. Are we tracking? I'm not as in charge of my days as I act like I am, or the place, or the setting. And why does God do it like this? In his sovereignty, why does he design it? God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. He is not far from any of us. And so what's it all about? When we look at the life of Jesus, you know how you read the Old Testament and then you read the New Testament, and sometimes you go, oh my gosh, it's all one story, it's all connected. You have those moments? This thing that Jesus is doing is fulfilling a thing from back here in the story, and your mind is just like blown by how God has been doing this one big redemptive plan the whole time, and you're just kind of getting let in on how intricately he's been weaving this thing together. You know, when the religious leaders come to Jesus, they keep trying to trip him up, and they go, okay, well, here's all the law, here's all the family history, here's everything. Jesus, why don't you tell us what matters and what doesn't matter? And in Matthew 22, here's how that looks. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together, and one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." All of the law, the Old Testament, and the prophets, the Old Testament, hang on these two commandments. What has he come to fulfill? Love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In the Gospel of Luke, there's another time that people come to him in Luke chapter 10 that looks really similar to this. And it says this: on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked him, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus, I don't know if you noticed this, sometimes he doesn't answer the question, he asks a return question. He asks this: "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." It's like he knew what Jesus' response would be, so he gives Jesus the response that he knew he was anticipating Jesus giving. "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asks Jesus, "Oh, well then who's my neighbor?" Have you ever got the answer from God and then tried to loophole your way out of it? Certainly my neighbor's not that guy. He's unlovable. In reply, Jesus said this: "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place, saw him and passed by on the other side." Here's the thing. The priests and the Levites, always the good guys in the stories that the Pharisees would have told, right? These are the elite, the religious, the spiritual. But a Samaritan, not one of the elite and not one of the good guys in anyone else's stories, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. And he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said. "And when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have." And then Jesus asks, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the experts in the law replied, they don't say the Samaritan, they can't quite choke, they can't get themselves to say it. So they go, the one who had mercy on him, resigned. The bad guy was the good guy. Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Here's the thing. Your neighbor may be the person who lives next to you, but neighboring is an art form. And it requires you to go. And it requires you to engage and to live a life where other people are in your world. See, the priest in the story, the priest is somebody who would have explained and taught and had knowledge of who God was and who God's like. I have been this guy who could have taught you about the mercy of God, but has not had mercy for people around me. Have you been like that before? You could have taught about the mercy of God, but when it comes time to show mercy, that's where the rubber actually meets the road. I've been the Levite before, for sure. I've been tangled up in an endless series of church worship services and not even known the needs of the people that God placed around me in my neighborhood. How could I if I didn't even know their names? And then the Samaritan in the story, the one who truly is neighboring. He sees the person and he engages. He goes above and beyond the need that someone else has. Is his problem. See, who is my neighbor is this really interesting question. I would suggest this: if we want to be people who practice the art of neighboring, it's impossible to love someone as yourself if you hold them at an arm's length or keep them on the other side of your fence. Is this resonating? The only way to love someone the way you love yourself is proximity. It's closeness. I have this family that lives next to us. They have kids that are roughly the age of our kids. Their kids don't have to knock when they come into our house. They just throw open the door and in they go because you're welcome here, you belong here. Now, what does this mean for me? It means I have to wear pants all the time in my own home. Do you see how inconvenient this is? I have to be ready to receive a visitor child at a moment's notice. Like, these kids have walked into my house and cracked open my fridge to see what I got. You can't love them if they're not allowed near. We have this gal that lives across the cul-de-sac from us, Miss Sarah. She's basically like another grandmother in our world now. And we're at the swim meet watching all the kids swim this week. And Miss Sarah says, I think it's time for me to walk home. And so me and our twin girls slowly walk with Miss Sarah back to her house. She gets there all right. We talk to her about her life and her plans to go to Colorado and when she's going to see her daughters again. And how proud she is of who they've become in this world. And I think about the distance between a guy that lived in an apartment and didn't even know a neighbor's name and the rhythm of mine and Brooke's life now. The truth is, it's far messier to neighbor than it is to just live in my own little world. It's far more inconvenient. It was hot. I didn't want to walk slowly outside. And yet, these new rhythms of life lived close to people. You can't love them at a distance. You can, yes, I have a general love for humanity. Okay, that does a lot of good. What about the gal that lives across the cul-de-sac, who's going out of town and needs her flowers watered? Neighboring is practical and loving, but it has to be done close. That's the deal. And so over these next weeks, what I believe God wants to do in our community is, yes, we've done tremendous work and made tremendous sacrifice to build a new place where we make room for people, but I believe that the people that God wants to gather into the place are probably already in our lives. But some of them may be invisible or unnamed to us. And what I believe God wants to do is increase and grow our capacity for loving to open our lives up even more than they already are. To see people through the eyes of Jesus. Oh, they're not following him? Well, he's crazy about them and he went to the cross for them. And I know this and I have it to share. This is what we're preparing in our hearts because I believe that the story God intends for our church is that we would have built something too small once again because he loves that many people. Would you pray with me? And we're just going to reflect and ask God a really simple question as we go worship. God, here's the really simple question. And if God brings a person to your mind as we do this, you might want to write it down or share it with somebody. God, who have you placed right in my path? But I don't have eyes to see them. They've been invisible to me. Perhaps it's a friend who you believe, oh, they don't have any room for faith. They'll never come to Jesus. And Jesus says, well, I sure haven't given up on them. Who are invisible to us? Is it a neighbor whose name we have yet to learn? Is there someone that belongs at our dinner table with us? Is there someone who has a need? Is there a coworker that we only ever talk about business with? And yet, God put us in the office right next door, and that can't have been on accident. I'm just curious, as all of our heads are bowed, did anyone have the face of a person in their life come to mind that God is putting on your heart? Yes? Come on. So here's the assignment for the week. Pray these two things. God, I pray that you would show me how to love them as much as you love them. And God, give me grace-filled moments to open my life to them so they can see a reflection of Jesus. And then guys, just keep praying for them and keep praying for them and keep praying for them. And then watch God do all the work. And they just might come to a community of faith and hear about the goodness of God if someone would ask, do you want to come with me? To hear about this Jesus who has changed everything. I pray for an outbreak, like a revival and an outbreak of people who are far from you, God, just an outpouring of evangelism on this community to share the good news, to share our lives. God, I pray that your Spirit would rest on this community of faith. That every one of us would have a story about how we started to neighbor and then God started to change everybody around us. Remember who he showed you. And don't forget to pray. Put your hand up and tell God, here am I. If you're after him, I'll be useful to you. Let's worship together.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to vkcwest.com.